All right, guys. Last piece for the day, Monticello, designed by Thomas Jefferson, an American statesman who would become our third president. Basically, we're going to try and figure out what were his inspirations for this structure, and I'm giving you some videos on works that have been designed by him. Thomas Jefferson, before he became president, was ambassador to France, who followed up Benjamin Franklin and basically served as the country's representative there during some rather formative years. So let me set you up here with the PowerPoint and we will get underway. Now, a couple of things that I think you ought to remember about Monticello is that this is not the original house that was here. There was a two-story structure that was more like a country house you would find right outside the city of Venice, designed perhaps by Antonio Palladio. The central plan house with like a large domed place in the middle with wings that spread off of either side. What we see today is actually a redesign of the house after Jefferson returns from France. He's been inspired by French neoclassicism as well as the Roman ruins he found in the south of Nimes. There's a square building there that we'll talk about in a second that you've seen before in my presentations, but he is absolutely bowled over by the classicizing references that are made in France. As a foundling nation, just getting on its feet, he's looking for ways to like entrench democratic power in the household that he wants to set up. So this is very different than the typical British or by default US household, which was a multi-storied structure that usually was located in a heavily populated city. That probably would have access to waterways because, after all, households were places of business too. So he decidedly looks for a place that is removed from the typical Philadelphia or New York or Boston style home where everybody lives on the river and uses it as a mode of access. He wants something more palatial, more dignified, and more stately. And that's why he engages the vocabulary of neoclassicism to do this. Now, you've seen, of course, my reference here to the nickel. This building is on the back of the nickel and is something that we kind of take for granted, but have to realize that this was only done after much planning and thought and careful consideration. What we're looking at here that references the neoclassical, these words you haven't heard in a while. I see a pediment. I see Tuscan columns. I even see like a Doric frieze where I have metopes and triglyphs, right, that are just referenced right there. I have a classical balustrade, and it should be no short thing to see that we've got a dome over the structure. But in keeping with American indigenous materials, we're not seeing marble. While there is some stone in the foundation, most of this is brickwork. So it reflects an American character that basically uses those materials, but a classicizing approach to style. Jefferson is going to open up the facade too to let more natural light in. So it will have less of the stodgy, cold neoclassical feel. It'll be something that basically emerges into what we call today in the US a federal style. Keep in mind, the structure is two stories. Okay, I know that it looks like a single story. Jefferson was trying to humanize the proportions of the building and make it look less like the British architecture that he knew. He definitely, after his trip to France, becomes a lover of all things French, and French neoclassicism is what's going to inspire him. Now, kind of goes without saying, guys, this is a house, okay? This is his home. So if you're ever asked about the function of Monticello, it is his estate. This is where he lives. What you're going to find, though, is that the living spaces he allows himself are relatively small. Most of his time inside is designed basically to be set up around conversation or reading. He is a prolific statesman who doesn't believe in the pomp and circumstances of large dining halls. There is a provisional dining room, but he was even known to kind of sleep in the library on shelves that had been installed. There is no like formal super huge bedroom here. It's all going to look like a study to you if you ever take a tour. Of course, we have to realize that it's not just the central building. There are servants' quarters all along the perimeter, kitchens that are created for cooking and handling all of this. This is very much like a Roman palatial house. So it has more buildings than just the central house itself. If you were to compare this to a Mannerist house of roughly about 100 years before, then you would see some similarities here with the central, like rotunda and rooms branching off of the center, but a house that looks pretty much good from all angles, right? There's a south terrace, a north terrace, and then porticos on either side. So he borrows heavily from Palladio, but the redesign is much more French neoclassical. This is the Villa Rotonda outside Vicenza in Italy. And it shows you that this is supposed to be kind of like a party house in the middle of a large green space, where servants' houses are far to the exterior, and all of the functioning parts of the house, the kitchen, the bakery, all of that stuff are not in the main domicile. It is a backdrop basically for lords and ladies to escape the dense city of Venice itself and have just kind of a more pastoral experience. And I think that's what Monticello does for Jefferson. If you look at the site plan, you can actually see that it is up on a hill. Monticello, Little Mountain, is what gives this thing its name. And there are large green spaces around the central core of the building. You had a long approach from the river if you were coming to see Monticello. So this would give you kind of the sense that you were approaching a formal estate rather than something that was tucked in neatly with everybody else in a very dense American city. This gives you an idea of the stateliness that he wants to incorporate. This is the State House in Richmond, Virginia, and it looks exactly like what he found in the south of Nimes, the square Maison Carré. He made notes, he did drawings, he collected as much information as he could because he knew he was going to be setting taste and identifying character for this young nation, which really didn't have an elaborate history, right? So what we see in this neoclassical facade are exactly the same kinds of vocabulary where we have ionic columns, we have pediments, we have dentils and friezes, with everything being elevated up on a platform. So you get the sense that this is going to make a sacred statement out of something that's essentially civic. Okay. This is UVA campus, where you can see the Rotunda building, which definitely is inspired by the Pantheon. So everything that's classical is going to have a role to play in buildings that would be designed by Jefferson for the American country. This building in the heart of Paris is the Hotel de Salm, Salm, and it was there during the time that Jefferson was staying in Paris. And this may too, in its French neoclassicism, have provided an influence because it looks very much like what eventually becomes the design. You have a central core of the building with wings off to the side. You also have a two-story building that's made to look like it's one story. So perhaps even existing buildings in Paris were making an influence on Jefferson. All right. So taking a look at this, I want you to kind of see, I flipped the floor plan here so that you could see, if you're looking at this pediment and the rotunda just behind, this is the floor plan that jibes with that. The bedroom for Jefferson is just off to the right. And we have the terraces on the far side as well as the portico on the other side. So it's just a collection of rooms for him to use as a home. And this is where he would receive guests to discuss things late into the evening. So it's an auspicious kind of American home. It starts a new style in the U.S. So as you guys can see, even the rotunda room is not that big. And most of the furnishings there are in pairs, right? You have pairs of chairs, pairs of people gathered around desks. This house was meant for entertaining people who loved talking and thinking late into the evening. So it was designed for those particular uses. So As far as Monticello goes, we typically can compare it to other domestic structures. Later, we'll compare it to Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. We also will probably compare it to the Houses of Parliament that we're going to read about. Architecture basically shapes the activities that need to go on inside. And for a Democratic ambassador, then later president, this design seems to facilitate those kinds of discussions that need to happen. So that is it for today, guys. We will be coming back to Monticello later, so I'll leave it at that. Next class, we're moving on to Romanticism. So we'll be talking about Ong, we'll be talking about Delacroix. We'll be moving forward in the century when you see additional challenge and strife in the French history. But we will keep it limited to what applies to Romanticism, okay? Thanks a lot, guys. I'll talk to you later. Have a good day.